Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, for the invitation, and for having me here to share with you our analysis of the role of civil society, its importance, but also how it's threatened, how the space is shrinking. This has been mentioned several times. How this is happening, where this is happening, who's responsible for this, but also what we can, what governments can do, but also what civil society can do. And I would like to start with you with a little experiment. Can we see the next slide, please? I would like you to, you can close your eyes because I would like you to imagine something. I'd like you to imagine a world without civil society. That's a very abstract, I admit, but perhaps you can imagine a world without the women's movement, without brave women struggling for gender justice. And you could think about what life you would have if this movement, if these women didn't exist, didn't fight for gender justice. I can say my life would be very, very different. I wouldn't be here with you. And I think probably many other people in this room also wouldn't be here. Can we imagine the world without the trade unions and the workers' movement and our daily working life, without vacations, without social security, without all the social benefits when it comes to working conditions the trade union worked for and achieved for us? Really difficult. And then also, of course, we in Germany, we had an immense social movement in the East, which brought down the wall and vibrant curtain in Europe. And this also would not have been possible with civil society. There's the climate movement, which is so important to really force governments to stick to their commitments. And you might have thought of, or you're thinking perhaps of other examples as well. There are so many, it's really countless. Let's look at this a bit with more structure, what the role of civil society is and what it can achieve in democracy and also for sustainable development. Can I see the next? Thank you very much. So, civil society, of course, it has been mentioned, has a strong role in democracy, but I would really add and sustainable development. It's really also closely linked to the achievement of SDGs as well. Also, yeah, this is seemed to really be gotten in the background now, but I think it's really important to strengthen this as well. How important the SDGs are, and that that civil society plays a really crucial role in achieving them or trying. So the role of civil society is, of course, in service delivery, the more traditional charity work, but also in humanitarian work, humanitarian aid. We see it in all the conflicts and crises right now, how important the principles are, the humanitarian principles, and how important it is that there are humanitarian organizations on the ground, but also in our societies, social services by civil society. Our countries would collapse probably without them. But civil society also has a more political role, of course. The democracy, social movements, they raise awareness and bring attention to ignored groups and issues. They really can mobilize masses and bring important issues back to international and national agendas, like we've seen with climate change, for example, which is really necessary. But civil society also does a lot of research. They inform, they produce analysis, they publish and they disseminate data to create transparency and also to fight corruption, which is really essential. And especially when powerful pressure and lobby groups try to influence policies and politics. It's really, really relevant also when powerful politicians try to enrich themselves. And this is also linked to the watchdog role, of course, of civil society to call for accountability and to push for legal and structural reforms. And more, we also see the important legal work of civil society, of human rights organizations in doing strategic litigation. We also saw this in the field of the strategic climate litigation, also in Germany, at the Bundesverfassungsgericht in Switzerland, but also really all over the world. We are, for example, we are having partners in India doing strategic litigations for marginalized people to improve the social laws in India. So this is really a global phenomenon. And then, of course, really essential is the empowerment, representation, and participation role to really give voice to the vulnerable and marginalized who are so often forgotten, that their concerns, their needs are really taken into account. So civil society can really bring more stakeholders on board and can increase legitimacy and decision-making also. We have a bit of different picture when civil society space is shrinking. And this can be really linked to sustainable development as well, because it's civil society challenging inequalities and discrimination. As I said, giving this voice to marginalized people and call for their participation. But when civil society space is closing, inequalities are very likely to grow and to be more visible. Extreme income inequality can rise dramatically, and powerful elites are more likely to be enriched. Land and natural resources grabs, labor repression can happen more often and go undocumented, are not known in other countries, for example, or in other regions of the country. This is very important also for rural areas, which are far away from capitals. And unequal and exclusionary development policies and practices are more likely to happen. And then there's the really significant risk of leaving the most marginalized and vulnerable behind, really the core of the SDG. Let us quickly look at one example which can illustrate perhaps the role. Can you show the next, please? SDG 5 and gender equality. Civic space and gender equality are really closely connected. Gender equality depends on strong, persistent voices advocating for women, girls, and LGBTQI rights. And one example is, for example, Cambodia, female workers in the garment sector. We can really see the social and economic dimension of gender justice and also civic space. Just this year, a Cambodian female union leader representing women in the garment industry was sentenced to several years in prison because of her struggle for better working conditions and wages. The suppression of labor and labor movements in the garment industry affect mostly women. They make 90% of all workers in the industry. So when they're not able to protest for better conditions and wages, they are more likely to have miserable working conditions and earn less when they need to cover their costs of living. So it has an effect on the development. It affects poor and disadvantaged women most directly, and it can provoke that gender inequalities grow. And what is also interesting is that we really see worldwide also how gender equality and gender justice is challenged by a global backlash and a global, we can say, anti-gender movement. We see its effects also in Europe, in Hungary, for example, or in Poland, but also in Latin America the fundamentalist movement in Brazil, for example, challenging social reproductive rights and sexual education. So, and we really see a connection here as well with the groups. It's mostly the same groups who call for a limitation of the power of civil society, which also call for limits of gender justice. Before we come to the map, I would like to share with you a quote by Meissler. He has been the first UN Special Rapporteur for peaceful assembly and association. He said very impressively, the trend for closing civic space, laws and practices that restrict civil society's ability to operate is threatening to take the air from civil society's lungs. It's unfortunate because it's both a self-destructive and short-sighted move, even for those orchestrating the closure. Repression today may help a government silence a critic tomorrow or boost a business profit the next day. But at what cost next month, next year, and for? So let us now turn to the data of the Civil Society Atlas. I brought one copy, which is here with me, and there are two others in the back if you're interested in showing and having a look. So Brot für die Welt, together with Civicus, the South African INGO, working on civic space for many years. We published together the Atlas based on the data the Civicus Monitor is collecting worldwide on a regular basis with many, many organizations contributing to it. And this is the world map they released last December and which we published in this current Atlas. So the green countries, you can see the dark green countries, they're all open countries. This means that civil society is relatively free, enjoys the fundamental freedoms. It's also appreciated in these countries. Example, when it comes to registration, and often marginalized groups can feel the pressure. The light orange, yellowish orange, obstructed, it's normally a mix of legal and practical limitations. There are often legal constraints, NGO laws, internet laws or digital security laws, anti-terrorism laws, for example, which really mean that civil society isn't really, and also the organizations aren't free to work. Often they're not, it's very difficult to receive funding and money from outside. And we often can find violence against activists, defamation, and also criminalization of civil society activists. So they're imprisoned for their engagement. Repressed, the darker orange means that the civic space is already severely restricted. Activists are often surveilled, monitored, intimidated, threatened, injured, in some cases even killed. And often state forces use violence against protesters in demonstrations. And we mostly see media and internet controlled in many cases. In closed countries, we find an atmosphere of fear and a high level of impunity when activists are abused, threatened, or killed. Criticism on the regime is severely punished, and there's normally no freedom of the press. The internet is also highly censored, and independent websites are often blocked. Let's look at the next slide. Here you see the the different figures when it comes to the world population. Before you saw the states, but it's really appalling when you see how many people are really affected and to live in countries where have a sound problem. Yeah, can I continue? Yeah, so it's really shocking when you see how many people really live, especially in the dark orange, in the repressed countries, and also the closed countries, and yeah, you already can say it gets already quite difficult for critical and independent civil society, yellow countries. So when you put this figure together, you really get to the 85% of people who are really having problems when they're speaking out freely, when they're active for the rights of marginalized groups like LGBTIQ groups or migrants or others. So can we have the next slide? Thank you. So let us look a bit how the limitations do look like. And I listed some. We just did a little internal survey at Bread for the World, because we work in so many countries worldwide, and I have so many knowledgeable colleagues who work on the different country contexts, and we just did a survey, an internal survey, in which we're also brought in the partner perspectives, and this is part of the survey, the results here. So we see a lot of threats and physical attacks, and also murders of human rights defenders, journalists, and mostly also environmental and land rights activists in the rural areas. We constantly have partners of Bread for the World who need to leave their home because they receive death threats, or there have been already attacks on their houses where they live with their families. So we have a special program as well to help them to relocate or to find legal help as well. But if you're interested in this issue, especially the environmental and land rights activists, I highly recommend to you the Global Witness report. They document yearly the figures of environmental and land rights defenders murdered. And just last year, it has been 177 murdered, and alone in Colombia, 60. The figures for Latin America are always the highest. This has to do with impunity, with structural problems, of course, in these countries, but also the figures are high because we're so well documented, because in Latin America, the local civil society is very well connected with national organizations and those to international. And so these figures reach our attention. We can assume that there can be much more figures also in Asia and Africa, but we're not so well documented. Well, when restriction of freedom of assembly, association, and speech is, of course, a restriction of fundamental freedoms, not to be allowed to speak freely what you're thinking, protests which cannot happen, which are answered with a lot of violence, associations which cannot work on the issues they would like to work on, or which are even closed. If you're working on Nicaragua, you know how many, really thousands of organizations have been closed in the last years. Really, really severe crackdown on civil society, or also in Russia, especially already before, but especially now with since last year with the war. And we have these strong restrictions, especially in the red and orange countries, which I showed you before, especially in Asia and the Middle East, Egypt, China, Saudi Arabia, but also countries like Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, also Azerbaijan, for example, and another European country, or Belarus, but conditions are very different. The next point, fake news, defamation, online hate, is something which really happens everywhere, and which we see in Germany now also the last years, you know it all, it really has severe silencing effects. And very dramatically, it's mostly women and also girls who are affected by this, and other and minorities, LGBTIQ, but also migrants, people with a migrant background. And this is really very harmful. But especially these groups who don't often have the equal rights, that they are silenced in these fora. Lawfare, I already mentioned the laws. It's not only the NGO laws, the registration laws or regulations, for example, but it's really, it can be a cyber law or digital security law or an agent law, anti-terrorism law. So there can be many laws which can criminalize civil society or shut down organizations. And especially a law like the foreign agent law, which was introduced by Russia, for example, more than 10 years ago, is really heavily copied. The latest edition has now been passed in the third reading just a month ago in Kyrgyzstan. And which is especially sad because civil society fought so many years against such a law. And now it has been, also with the support of the international community, and now it has been so quickly passed, and it's quite a shock. When surveillance is, you probably heard about the Pegasus scandal 2 years ago, which really showed the figures. I think we all knew that civil society activists are surveyed, but it was interesting to see the and this is ongoing. It doesn't mean because this has been covered now that everything is fine. Or it's like partners of ours think very carefully what they say when and where, and also how we can communicate with them. And then something which I also mentioned already, that the civil society space in one country can for one group be a completely different one than for another one. Yeah, especially LGBTIQ groups, but in Europe also climate activists, migrant defenders. The space can look very, very different for different groups of civil society. Yeah, and as we have as we have many participants from Uganda, this is the most known anti-LGBTIQ law, of course, with most severe sentences, death penalty, which is unbelievable. But there are more and more countries also introducing such laws in sub-Saharan Africa, and where, I mentioned the fundamental movements, often with a religious background. Also in Latin America, we really see this wave of restrictions against sexual minorities. Can we have the next slide? Let's have a look at the drivers for this phenomenon. So, one thing I think which we can say is really that it's also because of the success of civil society, because civil society is successful in the watchdog role, in speaking out, in documenting problems. And you have to acknowledge transparency, representation, accountability, justice. That's all democracy. That's all hard work. Participation. It's discussion, and it's annoying. And it can be annoying for governments who think it's better that critics are silenced, and that democracy and accountability is too much work, and who rather would like to win the next elections and don't have their politics and powers challenged. And this is, by the way, also something which we see very closely, elections. There's a lot of measures always around elections that internet shutdowns happen mostly around elections, but also police violence against protests and so on. When we have power struggles, there's a bit of an overlap, I see. So the power struggles also around natural resources, political and economic, power around natural, about mining and land, for example, other land grabs. And it's very sad that those who defend the rights, that they are seen as the ones who are the problem, who are the troublemakers. They would like to solve the problems and work for a better future, but they are seen by many who find that, they have a problem for a win, a parliamentarian win, a presidential win, or a big infrastructure project. And I think this, especially in the development community, I think this is interesting as well, that it's really a conflict on different development models. It's really a conflict on the quick economic growth, big infrastructure development, which clashes with development models of inclusion, social development, and civil society participation. Here we really see different, really models of development. In one model, the civil society has a very strong role, and in the other, it's often seen as as a problem. Then we have the whole cultural struggle and conflict side, when we look at LGBTIQ, for example, but also on nationalism, the importance of a nation, ethnicity. If migrants are seen as an enrichment or a threat in a society, the importance of the environment, sexual freedom, sexual reproductive rights, and family protection. So there's also this phenomenon. And then what is also, it's a symptom also of a crisis of democracy and human rights. I think we have to come to the end, right? I'm sorry. Then I keep it short here, and we look at the last thing. So what should be done? What do we think should be done? So parliaments and national governments, they really should guarantee the fundamental freedoms, expression, assembly, and association, and really for everybody. There shouldn't be exceptions for particular groups. Laws and regulations and policy have to enable civil society, and civil society really should be recognized. They should be able to have their own priorities and plans and approaches, and it should be accepted that they are different from government often, or that they need to be different. The participation, of course, is crucial. Allow involvement in decision making, and I think it has been said before already, what is really for civil society itself, and you look what we can do as civil society, I think we really need to stand in solidarity and really build alliances and mean it. Especially right now, also with the war in Gaza, there's so many divides inside civil society, which are getting bigger and bigger. And I think we really need to look at what we have in common, and especially in Germany, who exaggerated say who the real enemy is for civil society in this country. And I think we really have to stand together against the attacks that are challenging for the freedoms and independence of civil society here in Europe, but also abroad. So those who are free to do so, they really need to speak out against the injustices and support those who are under pressure. And we really have to be attentive and critical, and also try to show the positive contribution you're bringing. I think this is a bit of a problem also sometimes with the society. We are the critics, we are the watchdogs, we point to the problems, but we often don't communicate well what impact we're bringing, what good to the society we're bringing. And I think more and more in this time of crisis, we probably also have to work more on articulating, disseminating our visions. How do we envision the future? And how do we want to support this? And how do we work for this? And what impact? Thank you. Sorry for taking a bit more time.